it's at least worth considering. Remember, it's administrative support, so it might be some office use, papers, printer ink, materials like that might fall into a federal supply schedule that might come into play in terms of costs. We might make it federally supplied or government supplied material to take advantage of government volume purchase discounts. So page 115 in the manual, that's worth a look. Okay, so page 115 in the manual addresses it. It also gives paragraph references in the AMS Procurement Guidance that has to do with GSA Advantage and e-buy and GSA Global Supply. Okay, I'm on to the last section in phase 2, the contract formation phase, dealing with contract award, which is the last action before you move on to performance and administration. So after evaluation complete, results are presented to the SSO. The source selection official, they may make a selection decision or make a screening decision. They might decide to amend and reopen the screening information request, or they may cancel the procurement altogether. The source evaluation team documents their evaluation that they present to the source selection officer. SSO uses the documentation to help make the decision, but again, the bottom line determination is best value for the FAA. It drives the decision basis for the FAA. So the SSO has to document any rationale that she or he uses as the basis of the decision, and also show how the successful proposal compared to other proposals. If the best value is deemed to be other than the lowest price, we need to justify the paying of a price premium, show that that additional money, that premium, gives FAA a superior and advantageous position. When the SSO signs the source selection document, then the CO has the opportunity to execute and distribute the contract, subject to sometimes there are some requirements about congressional notification. We're going to touch on that probably tomorrow, depending on the contract size. It might require notification to Congress, which takes about two day delay before you can actually forward the contract to the vendor. Here it is, Congressional Affairs notification. We're going to talk about it right now. Congress has to be notified 48 hours ahead of time before the award if it is $3.5 million or more. That's the total value, including all options and ceilings. Now, this doesn't apply to interagency agreements. This is only outside contracts with vendors. The Department of Transportation Assistant Secretary for Governmental Affairs, or some designee, is the person who notifies Congress and advises the contracting officer when Congress approval is achieved that the CO can release the contract. Now, the CO can go ahead and sign the contract. You just can't forward it to the vendor yet until you receive that congressional approval. So if it's a modification or a delivery or a task on a task order, something like that, it's not required to go before Congress. Remember, modifications and delivery task orders are generally considered part of the initial overall obligation ceiling. As long as Congress was notified about the initial reward, there's no need for additional approval. Now, press release and public announcement is another way. After congressional notification procedures have been completed, sometimes a press release is appropriate. If it's in the interest of the general public, you have to think, what is newsworthy? So a dollar amount or some kind of uniqueness of the contract or just something in public interest. It's always advantageous to get the FAA out there in the news. If the CO decides they're going to use a press release, it takes about 4 weeks to run it through the system and get it posted on the FAA website or released to the public press. So they should allow about 4 weeks for that to happen, or try to time it 4 weeks before the planned contract award. Public announcement sometimes might be considered, especially if it's a large contract, or if it opens up a lot of subcontracting opportunities or high public visibility. So the FAA Contract Opportunities website is a good place. Also, just generally on the internet, trade magazines, local newspapers, all opportunities for a public announcement. Contract funding, financing, or payment has to comply with the Anti-Deficiency Act. If you studied appropriations law, the Anti-Deficiency Act is the one constraint on the use of appropriated funds that actually has teeth, and severe penalties, reporting requirements, and potentially even criminal penalties associated with violations. So it's just important before a CO actually obligates funds that they ensure that sufficient funds are actually available for obligation. The exception is if you make an award for services that don't begin until the next fiscal year, or actually fiscal year funds. You can award a contract now, but it's for funds that won't be used until the next fiscal year's appropriation. It's just important that there's a clause in the contract that states that the vendor is not allowed to use or obligate any of these funds, and that there's no obligation on the part of the government in the event that those appropriated funds are not cleared. So in other words, there's no actual obligation until the next fiscal year. Severable services are worth a note. If you give a severable services contract, what are severable services? By definition, if it's a contract where if you terminate the contract, you still had benefit up to that point. It's not like something with a final report that the government doesn't get the benefit until the entire contract is finished. But if you have a severable services contract and the period of performance extends into the next fiscal year after the funds expire, you're limited to just a 12-month period of performance. It's called the 12-month rule. So it's important that the CO provide copies of any contract awards and modifications to the contracting office, the accounting office, so that the documentation and tracking and payments against available funds can be made. The CO and the program office are encouraged to periodically review allocated funding against a contract. Maybe if you complete a contract period or consider an option period or completing a contract line item is a good time to, again, review the contract and funding just to make sure that you don't exceed the available funding and violate the Anti-Deficiency Act. It also helps if you determine that there's some unused funds. They can be potentially de-obligated for a contract line item that's completed that didn't require the full amount. It helps, number one, for simplify closeout processes for contract administration when you get to the end of the contract, but also potentially those de-obligated funds might be available for use elsewhere when someone else has a need. George said something about continuing resolution situations like right now. You said you had a modification with $0. You're now adding funding since work starts later, non-severable. Then yes, you have to give funding up front. Yeah, it needs to be fully funded at the time you make the obligation if it is a non-severable contract. So I imagine the modification, the $0 modification, was probably a schedule modification because of continuing resolution delays. It's a question mark. Okay. Congress said, yeah. My note on continuing resolution right now, guys, is get used to it. If things continue like they have been, we might be breaking records. Let's talk about a system for award management. New contract awards, modifications, agreements, leases. There's a contract information repository that's required. Where prospective contractors have to be registered as part of the system and award management database before they can receive a contract from the government. Contracts are managed for specific products and services. The whole purpose is to get stuff in a timely manner. So if the CO intends to alter the obligation without consideration, that means without changing the dollar amount, they should seek concurrence from legal counsel and possibly the chief of the contracting office, the COCO, before execution, and document the rationale for the contract modification. Contracts get audited. Auditor looks at the information and provides information and advice to the requesting activity, to the program office that's asking for the audit. They review the financial and accounting aspects of the contractor's cost control system. They also look at their financial and accounting records and report their findings to the requesting agency. Yeah, Eric's talking about continuing resolutions. Yeah, it's turning into an every year thing. About 7 or 8 years ago, it was about 75%, but since then it's been virtually every year. So now if you recalculate it over the last few years, it's getting closer to 90-95% of the years we end up having a continuing resolution. And it used to be you get a continuing resolution of the 12 appropriations bills. You might get a continuing resolution of 1 or 2. There's a couple of hangups that they're working on. Now we get to the end of the year and there's zero, none of the 12 appropriations bills have been passed. Let's see, are we still on page 13 of your presentation? Page 113. You mean of the, we're on page 113 in your student manual, if that's your question. Yeah, the only safe space tends to be the DoD budget. That used to be very safe. But I think increasingly we've seen even the DoD budget isn't as safe as it used to be. I also teach a class in appropriations law, and I've got to tell you, it's a very interesting time to be talking about appropriations law. Okay, James says this is what happens when you bundle them all together for leverage. Okay, that makes sense. All right. I think I failed to advance your slide. Yeah, that's why the question, if we were on page 113, no, we were on page 114. Thank you. And now we're on page 116. All right, now it makes sense. I'm sorry, you were looking at the wrong slide. So I'll go back. I talked about congressional affairs notification, press releases, contract funding. We talked a little bit about the contractors have to be registered with the system for award management, contract management audit. So thank you for flagging that. I didn't advance your slide. So protests and contract disputes. We've talked a little bit about that already. That's always one of those areas that you don't want to get involved in, but it still comes up. FAA is committed and is part of the acquisition management system to early and quick resolution using some form of alternative dispute resolution to the maximum extent possible. Protests concerning screening information requests are resolved at the agency level through the FAA dispute resolution system. And the dispute resolution system involves ODRA. Every contractor contract has a clause in there requiring them to use ODRA and alternative dispute resolution methods. ODRA is meant to be an independent agency, an independent arbiter of claims and conflicts in contract disputes within the FAA. So they manage the whole dispute resolution process. They promote alternative dispute resolution. They conduct the proceedings. They recommend action. Their decisions are considered binding on the program office, whatever ODRA comes on. Of course, if the contractor is not happy with the ODRA decision, they always have the option of pursuing a civil litigation. I would not encourage them or let them know that they have that option, but that's just part of the U.S. legal system. So ODRA is authorized to adjudicate protests and contract disputes. They issue orders and decision. They resolve or sometimes settle if there isn't an easy resolve. Protests and contract disputes. They provide findings and recommendations to the involved parties. And sometimes they even recommend changes to our FAA acquisition system. Anybody ever get involved in alternative dispute resolution here in this group? Has anybody been involved in that? What are some alternative dispute resolution techniques? Mediation. Yeah, that's probably the best known. You put both parties in a separate room and a mediator goes back and forth. They talk to one party and get their opinion, talk to the other party, get their opinion. It's a way sometimes of easier to negotiate when you're not sitting face to face, easy to express your differences when you're not directly across from the party that you're mediating with. So that a reasonable degree of success with mediation. Eric, I got to go back to your comment. KTRs also have to have a cage code. Could you come on microphone for a second and explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, so a cage code is basically, well, it used to be a 5-character alphanumeric that everybody who wants to do business with the U.S. government, most of our allies and NATO, have to have that. And so, and now it's been expanded because like area codes, we've run out of numbers, right? So GSA has expanded it to, I think it's a UEID number or something like that. They also replaced Duns and Bradstreet, by the way, so they're no longer paid by the government to be like your verification source for vendors. But anyway, you have to have a cage code in order to do business with the U.S., anyone in the U.S. government, NATO, or a number of our allies. And those codes are they're actually managed by DLA, but the storefront on the front end is GSA, because you could imagine folks don't really want to know that DOD is behind doing business with the government, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I understand.
But to get a cage code, you have to offer up a certain amount of your T&C information that's templated, a whole lot of information about your business. The government does a lot of due diligence in looking into your business before they issue you your cage code. So typically if a vendor comes in to get a contract and they don't have a cage code, then the contracting office will work with them to help them get one established in order for them to do business.
I imagine that probably happens in the small business implementation. Or somebody
I don't
doesn't yet have
know.
a
I don't
cage
think it
code.
applies to like credit card buys.
Okay.
But there are actually, just if you're interested in knowing, there are actually, I forget the acronym. I'll look it up for you. There's actually offices throughout the country funded by DLA that businesses can go to get free assistance with proposal writing, establishing their cage codes, how to search for business with the government, how to do business with the government. And it's all a free service that a lot of folks don't even know about.
Okay. We also have UEIDs that Matthew mentions and Bonnie mentions, PTACs. In addition to having a cage code, do all contractors have to be registered in SAM in order to do business? My understanding, you need to be registered in SAM to do business with the FAA.
Yeah, SAM is the front end to all that.
Okay.
It used to be Fed Biz Ops.
Okay.
And GSA changed it over to SAM about, I don't know, it was before COVID, a year or two before COVID.
Okay. Naomi made a comment. She thought that cage codes were DoD specific, and UEI is used through SAM. But
they're synonymous. They may have changed the name to UEI, but it used to be a cage code. So I might be talking with old term. Okay,
but you still get a vendor still gets their accesses through the SAM system to obtain a UEI, or what you refer to as a cage code. Okay, there it is. Durst put it there, sam.gov. Good. That makes sense. So besides mediation, what's another alternative dispute resolution technique? Anybody know the difference between mediation and arbitration? There it is, David, arbitration, right on. Yeah, and Bonnie hit it. The difference is arbitration is binding. When two parties go into arbitration, we say whatever they decide, whatever the arbiter says, we'll commit ourselves to it. We'll hold ourselves to it. Whereas mediation is optional. You try to come to some resolve. It's a lot more negotiation involved with it. But if you don't come to agreement, you don't come to an agreement. There's nothing binding associated with it. There's other methods, having people write out their claims, reasons for dispute. One of the more important things in dealing with a dispute is separating facts from opinions and perceptions and emotional ties. And so one really good exercise is saying, here's the fact. Then separate from that, here's how it made me feel, because people feel validated, parties feel validated if they have a chance to express that, and it's important to separate the two because they get combined. And then the last thing would be to write, again, independent of the other party. This isn't a negotiation. Here's what I saw, or my perception. Here's the facts as I saw them. Here's how it made me feel. It's important. Now I feel validated, and this is the action that I want to make me whole again. If you capture those, separate those three things out, a lot of times the third party will have a better ability to help the two disputing parties to come to a resolve. So why do you think the FAA is committed to using alternative dispute resolution techniques? I think that doesn't require a whole lot of discussion. It's pretty obvious. If you can resolve a dispute and avoid going to court, it's a whole lot less expensive. And it also avoids having contractors feel frustrated. They don't have anywhere to turn besides the court. You know, I asked the question when we first started here, if anybody here has been through alternative dispute resolution. Anybody here work with ODRA on any claims for any contracts that you've been involved with? I guess not. Well, that's a good sign. Okay. Although somebody, I think it was Doris, was telling me she went through a year's worth of stop work order for a claim that ended up not being favorable to their contractor. Okay, let me ask you this question. Let's go back, put our swim headsets back on. Think about the three companies that we look at the offers from. Arm and Leg, I Am Serious, and Fair Shakes. Everybody decided I Am Serious was the contractor. We decided that's who we're going to go with. Now you've been asked to debrief the other two, debrief Arm and Leg and debrief Fair Shakes. What do you say during this meeting? What can you put out there? Okay, they were not the highest technically rated. That makes sense. Most people use technical ratings as the basis for their decision. So if that is the primary evaluation criteria, I think it's safe to say you were not the highest technically rated. Yeah, Eric suggested stick to the evaluation criteria and just give them evaluation on just against the evaluation criteria and don't get into too much detail. I would agree with that because you're opening yourself into all kinds of problems. And, you know, the more you say, the more trouble you can be in. When you're telling somebody thanks but no thanks, it's better to err on the side of brevity. Durr says, summary of findings report to start with against the specific requirements. They did not meet technical requirements. I agree. No past performance. Good. Key personnel, not enough experience. Okay, so that helps them understand how to get better for the next possible procurement. Alita says, don't put any notes in the margin. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Maria says, provide meaningful feedback on their submission. That's a good idea. Encourage them. If you want them to participate, to come back around the next time, you can make that, try to make it positive, saying this is the areas where we think you can improve and give feedback in that direction. Eric liked your no notes in the margin comment. And Bonnie says DOD has started enhanced debriefings, but they have to provide the debrief offer with the SSDD. Help me out. What is SSDD?
Resource selection decision document.
Okay.
So
Resource selection decision document.
Yeah. So you actually give them a redacted copy of the decision.
Wow. And does that have the value, the evaluations, either numeric or adjectival?
Yes, it has the unsuccessful offers and the successful offers ratings and price. It doesn't provide detail on the successful offer, but only on the evaluations on the unsuccessful offer, or the offer you're debriefing.
Yeah.
It's supposed to, you know, provide more answers to questions and waylay protests. So I guess more to come on that to see if it's successful.
Bonnie, is that a recent change that require the enhanced debriefing?
Yeah, it's probably in the last year or two, maybe.
Okay. I mean, it's not a fair question for an FAA employee as to what they're doing at the DOD, but
No, but well, I mean, that's where I was until 3 months ago. So,
okay.
and I did and we had to do that.
Yeah.
So there, I guess it's just to say that there's some schools of thought that you can provide more, if you provide more information, perhaps you'll not go into a protest because they'll just have information that they just want, but they have no other means of getting other than protesting. So.
Okay. First of all, Bonnie, welcome to the FAA.
Thanks.
And let me ask this. Those of you who have been with the FAA a little longer, has anybody here been involved with a vendor debriefing the unsuccessful bidders? Maria, you have. Could you tell me a little bit how that went? Durst has been involved with it?
Yeah, for my experience, after the award, I think they were given a chance to request for the debrief. And then FAA will respond, and the debrief will be conducted individually. I mean,
is it face-to-face?
It is face-to-face before pandemic. Yeah, and before that happened, the program office, contracting officer, legal, and all the source evaluation team, they have to come and group together and rehearse themselves, and they have to make sure that the main monitor would be the contracting officer, and contracting officer need to rehearse with legal, with the source selection team, and they already request for advanced questions from the vendor, and they are going to prepare that, and they make sure they have ground rules and what they can answer and not to answer. And they have contracting officer only assigned who can talk from the FAA side.
Very controlled. Okay. They don't want the FAA putting their foot in their mouth and getting in trouble as a result. Yeah, I imagine it's like dancing through a minefield when an unsuccessful vendor is starting to ask you questions. So you want to keep a tight rein and keep it scripted very well. That's interesting. It's a lot more formal than I would have expected. Because the FAA emphasizes this very informal approach pre-award, but it's interesting that they clamp down the formality post-award. Eric called it your taxpayer dollars at work. Yeah. Oh, even the private sector. If you're telling some proposer that they're unsuccessful, you don't want to get yourself in trouble. Very, very interesting. All right. Any other thoughts or questions on debriefing unsuccessful vendors?
Well, I just got, we had 4 vendors. One was the one that came back after being debriefed, after being sent a notice that they were not it was not selected. And the CO actually, we have a pre-award CO was the one who was debriefing the vendors, was not the whole team. But then a letter came from the vendor asking for clarification on there was a particular assessment that we did in the technical part, and they were not in agreement with it. So they wanted clarification onto why they were not selected based on A, B, C, and D. So we have to, come up with some more answers and explanation to the CO, and then the CO took it. So we didn't have to face-to-face, right? The CO did it and apparently worked out, right? But yes, some they review everything, come back and questions and why. So it's the summary of findings in the report, and the pre-award work really takes a lot of time. So it was a big effort, but yeah, I guess it was worth it.
I think it's interesting that the vendor has to request a debriefing. It's not automatic. In my mind, it'd be very difficult to imagine a vendor who's interested in doing future business with the FAA who would not request the debriefing. I can't imagine that somebody would fall into that category. Okay, well, good discussion. Thank you. And we're up against the next break. It's 5 minutes to 2 on the Eastern Shore. I'll give you a 10-minute break, and we'll meet back here at 5 minutes after 2 on the Eastern Shore. As always, I'll stick around for a couple minutes, and I'll put you otherwise back into the lobby and turn the timer on. So if you have questions, you can still reach me on your microphones. Okay, welcome back one more time. Let's see. We're going to go over a quick summary of the contract formation phase. Before I do that, though, why don't you give me a green thumbs up that we all made it back from break okay? Make sure everybody can hear me and everything's good. All right. I got caught one time with a microphone that wasn't working, so it's I think it's in my interest to double check to make sure everybody's with me before going forward. So I'm just going to, a couple slides, we're going to summarize what we talked about in the contract formation phase, and then we'll talk a little bit about the differences between AMS and FAR. So in this phase, we solicit offers, evaluate bids and proposals, award contract. This is the CO sort of runs the show through this. They publicize the proposed contract action, get involved with pre-award inquiries. Sometimes there's a pre-bid or pre-proposal conference. Solicitations should not be canceled unless it's clearly necessary and it's documented necessary. They may be canceled if, for instance, the requirement no longer exists or the funds are no longer available. Sealed bids, when public opened, are to award to the lowest possible responsive bidder. And the time for bid expiration needs to be communicated to the contractors. What this bid acceptance period is, so they can meet the schedule. CO may not make an award if she or he doesn't think that the price is or the cost is fair and reasonable. Offer is allowed to present alternative offers on different terms and conditions. But after the proposals have been evaluated and rated, the CO might establish a competitive range. So those that were within a competitive range, and then it might warrant further consideration or maybe even another screening information request. When negotiations are necessary, the CO prepares the negotiation and the agenda. For competitive procurements, discussions are conducted with each offer within the competitive range. It's an opportunity to identify and correct any deficiencies. Non-competitive procurement negotiations sometimes with the contractor until some favorable or at least acceptable agreement is reached. During contracting by negotiation, mistakes in proposals really have little impact because the discussions are permitted and we're able to cook those mistakes out and make corrections, or sometimes the vendor might choose to withdraw the proposal. Contracts are awarded by signing the contract or sometimes issuing a notice of award. So additional information is always available through the FAST system, fast.faa.gov. Your contracting officer is also a resource, and the source selection officer is a good place to go. So a couple of differences between AMS and FAR worth noting. A number of you have worked in both systems, so you're probably more familiar with this than I am. But the public announcement, official start date on the FAA uses the FAA Contract Opportunities website, and it's expected on anything that exceeds now 150,000. The FAR, on the other hand, they have a regulation, their policy saying contracting officers must publicize contracting action. So everything that exceeds $25,000, according to the FAR, is published as part of a public announcement. In communicating with offerers, very different. AMS, we touched on that when we talked at the end of at the module 1 or Module 2 rather. AMS procurement policy, as communications take place throughout the entire source selection process. Whereas in the FAR, the communication is limited. There isn't a lot of communication outside of the formal communication between the government and the offerers after, especially after the receipt of proposals. So resolving protests or contract disputes, AMS we have an inside the FAA, an internal dispute resolution system for protests. They're resolved at the agency level by following the dispute resolution system and working with ODRA. The FAR, alternative dispute resolution, is encouraged, but it's external to the agency. Protests can be filed either to the agency or all the way up to the Government Accountability Office, the GAO. The GAO has their own contract appeals board, which hears disputes. There's also a civilian board for contract appeals that is housed or managed within the GSA. Is another avenue for conflict resolution. And this brings us to the end of the post-award contract of the contract formulation phase. Module 4 now is post-award. It's the contract administration and performance phase. Are there any thoughts or questions on the contract formulation phase? You guys touched on some really great stuff. I'm going to look up the government USID or CAGE code requirements and how a vendor gets access to that. Is there anything worth talking about before we roll on to Module 4? By the way, this is day 2 of 3, and we're at Module 4 of 4. So I think all in all, it's a pretty good indication that we're moving ahead at a good clip. Jane, nobody needs help getting a contract or a CAGE. I just want to understand the system a little bit better for the next time I teach this class. But thanks for asking. So moving on to the next phase. After completion of this Module 4, you'll understand key aspects of performance and administration phase. You'll be able to talk about initiation of work, contract modification, design and production assurance, payment and accounting, special contract terms, terminating contracts, and functions associated with closing out a contract. So the post-award performance and administration phase has 5 main functions. We're going to talk about each of those functions in the next slide. First being the initiation of work and modification. So the questions include what should we include in the plan, the contract administration plan? Should we do a post-award orientation? What about consent to subcontract for the vendors who are complying with a subcontracting plan? Or is there a need to incorporate contract modifications or contract change clauses? Or should an option be included or an option be exercised? The design and production assurance questions are, how do we detect problems with a contract and what remedies are available in order to resolve these problems? And should the FAA report poor performance or even consider suspension or disbarment from a given vendor or supplier based on poor performance? Payment and accounting, the questions that come up are what's owed a contractor and how should the payments be made? Has the FAA been adversely affected by flaws? And if so, how can restitution be made? Durst made the mention of CPARs. CPARs is the vehicle that we use for capturing contractor performance information. Is also what we use to research contractor past performance when considering evaluating awards or submittals for current competitors. Special terms. If property has been furnished to the contractor, how do we make sure we get that stuff back and returned in whole and good condition? Any compliance associated with intellectual property, any patents or anything we need to be aware of, socioeconomic or contextual requirements being satisfied, small business requirements, economically or disadvantaged company participation requirements, contract termination. Should the CO terminate a given contract? What type of termination? For convenience or default? And finally, closing out a contract. How do you close out the contract? How should the contracting officer respond to any contractor claims? And who should the CO contact for assistance in closing out a contract? Okay. Durst mentioned again, performance evaluations and CPARs. CS and core. And William again, somebody either Durst or William, what do you mean by CS and core?
I thought you mentioned something about who the CO contacts besides the vendor. Internally, you know, there are contract specialists and the core to make sure that there's a checklist for closeout checklist, and when you go and see if all deliverables were done, if the PM concurs to that, you know, it's like a whole checklist before it can even attempt to the funds de-obligated, you know, any remaining balance, any last invoice, you know, it's like a whole checklist that we have. So
cool. Okay, I got it. Good. You know, in my experience, closing out the contract is one of the most difficult phases, if not the most difficult, and the most often neglected phase. And the reason is not because the work's any more difficult, but after you spend a lot of time and effort and energy, especially on a longer contract, it feels tedious going back and just closing it all out again. It doesn't feel like it's not productive work. It feels more like wrap up and documentation work. So unfortunately, it's an easy phase to ignore, but it's one of the primary phases for protecting the government's interest against a potential claim down the road. So let's talk about contract administration policy. So the phase includes issuing modifications, monitoring deliverables, ensuring policies and requirements are followed, reviewing invoices, and then closing contracts that are completed. Terms and conditions provide guidance for performing all these steps. The program office should communicate any issues or problems to the contracting officer. The CO is responsible for administering the contract, but it's a team effort. So they work with the program office and of course the core. So the first step is initiation of work in contract modifications. So the goal of managing contracts is to get the products or services in a timely manner. Sometimes modifications are made with or without consideration for the contractor, as long as it's in the FAA's best interest. The CO documents the circumstances, and the CO intends to substantially alter the obligations without consideration for the contractor. She or he needs to get concurrence from legal counsel and the COCO. I think we mentioned that once earlier in the seminar, from the Chief of Contracting Office. before execution of the modification. And you have to document the rationale for the modification. There are appendices in the procurement toolbox. They include examples for memoranda, letters, and agreements that can be followed for modifications. Stop work orders, novation, which is the replacement of one contract with a new one. Change name agreements. Again, these modifications need to be made with legal counsel concurrence. And there is a checklist. AMS contract file contents checklist is mandatory. You can find it in the FAST system online. There's a whole section for procurement form templates. So when determining the support needed from a representative, the CO needs to specify the authority that he or she is granting to the core, to the contract officer representative. It's a written memorandum of delegation. I know that we have some COs and cores in this class, so I'm sure you're very, very familiar. The limit of the authority is defined in writing. And, woe to any contractor that takes direction from a core without seeing what their written authority is for a given contract. Durst called it a core designation letter. Very good. So they get written authority based on a core designation letter for what they're able to do in terms of contract administration. So the core resolves technical issues, gives technical direction, interprets technical processes and requirements. They assist with the statement of work, government cost estimates. They help with negotiations. They, of course, monitor performance and accept services, supplies, or equipment. In other words, they say that's acceptable based on government requirements. And they're the ones that help reconcile invoices and recommend that payment should be made based on the acceptance of contractor deliverables. The designated core has to go through a certain amount of training. There's training that's required before you can function as a core within the FAA. Anybody here that is a core, could you give us a little bit of insight onto the extent of your authority exercised within a given contract? Does it vary a lot from contract to contract depending upon your designation letter? Dan or Durst?
For me, since I'm in the program office and we work with the same contracting officers, pretty much the same authority is authorized for both contracts, and they're both similar contracts, voice switches. So a lot of the same responsibilities, just with different vendors.
Okay. It looks like we have a lot of cores in this class. How much training is required for a core within the FAA? Is there a defined training path?
Yeah, there is. There's 3 levels of core, 1, 2, and 3, and this class actually completes my requirements for level 3.
Hey, congratulations. Congratulations. Do you have differing levels of contract authority based upon your level 1, 2, or 3 as a core?
Yeah, I mean, based on 1, 2, or 3, there are different levels of complexity of programs that you're authorized to be a core for.
Okay. Is the FACC, Martina, acceptable training for somebody to be a core? It's the FAC's contracting requirement. Oh, your mic's not working. That happened to me yesterday. Welcome to the world of online webinars.
So Jim,
Yes.
there is a checklist for the course. So For core one, you do the minimum. It's not too much training, but you have a checklist. For core two, you have a checklist. For core three, this is part of, of core three. But I think it's really good for core two to be actually attending these meetings as soon as they finish. Sometimes it feels like a core two thinks, well, I don't have all the experience on the checklist, so I'm going to wait. I'm going to suggest my course not to do that, but actually to take the training, on the path to get the core three. So then it might help them with the experience on the contracts they are working on towards getting core three, because the checklist indicates the familiarity on the contracts you have worked with. And this is really good for them to have a little more understanding of how it works. So,
okay. So the checklist includes experience and training requirements for core level.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I just got it back working.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Martina. Let me ask this. Those of you who are cores or going for level 3, I don't know how to ask this question without sounding like I'm patting myself on the back, but I'm looking for an indication, the degree of helpfulness. My concern is this. You guys are working with cores. You're dealing with, as a core, you're working with procurement activity every day. How much of what I'm talking about in this class is new? How much of what I'm talking about actually expands your understanding of your role or your job as a core? Martina said that the levels were eliminated.
Since when?
Right. I was enrolled. I was put in this class because I was told the levels were eliminated. There's no more 1, 2, and 3. It's all just FAC C now.
Oh, that's
my
interesting.
Understanding.
Huh. I wonder if that's
if I'm incorrect. If I'm not correct, please someone correct me. I'm sorry.
No, I know.
I don't think that applies for the FAA.
Right. So there is the FAC and the FAA. So you get, there's certain requirements for, let's say, core 3, and you get core 3 FAC first, and then but you have to take like the AMS in order to be 3. So the levels will still remain.
Yes.
It's just there's a differentiation whether you get first core 3 at this level, but then you need to have the specific stuff for AMS. If not, you cannot be considered FAA core 3. But levels 2 is still there.
Okay. So Bonnie says they're in the process of switching over or implementing from level 1, 2, and 3 to FACC professional.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That is exactly what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
Okay. Bonnie, thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. Okay. Let's talk about contract modifications. Okay, Bonnie says she thinks the new standard might be in effect early next year. I do my work for the acquisition training branch. So I think they would probably be involved in establishing any kind of new standard that is required. Interesting. Okay. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit more about types of contract modifications. Of course, I think it goes without saying modifications can be bilateral or unilateral. Bilateral is some sort of equitable adjustment. You work with the contractor. Sometimes it's a matter of formalizing or definitizing a quick response contract. Sometimes it's just reflect some other agreements that the parties have made, but now we're going to formalize as a written contract. So and sometimes the changes are actually requested by the contractor, but so we work with the contractor on that. Unilateral, as the term implies, is we're imposing the changes upon the contractor. So it's made without concurrence. of the contractor. So administrative changes, sometimes issue changes under a predefined change clause. In other words, we foresaw that there might be changes. Some authorized change might also happen. What type of changes might be unilateral within a change clause? It might be something like, let's say, a cost increase, a dollar volume increase for some sort of a, let's say, a fuel price change. So if the contract payment is tied to current fuel prices and prices go up to a vendor, we might be an automatic adjustment that can be accommodating with a change modification. Might be a clause in there if you think we're going to climb a learning curve, and as a result, costs are going to be dropped. There might be a change clause that we're going to share reduction in unit price by increasing quantities, whatever you devise ahead of time. But it's important, if there is a change clause in there, that is, it's considered contractually be an antecedent obligation, meaning the obligation already existed, and the entire contract with the change clause actually needs to be obligated at the time you make the contract, even though you're not committing the contractor to that yet. So extending contracts. Ideally before the contract expires, you can use a bilateral contract modification. Both parties agree we're going to extend this contract. It may be part of a single source procurement, in which case justification and approval is required. If you're considering a contract extension, it's wise to consult legal counsel, especially if the extension can be considered to be new work. Of course, after the expiration of the contract, then it's too late. You're not allowed to extend a contract after it expired. You can't extend it to incorporate the current performance period after it is expired. At that point, it's too late. Okay, Maria says at least 6 months before. Yeah, because it takes a while to put it into effect. So it's good to start that consideration early. Suspensions and stop work orders are issued when contract issues arise. For architecture and engineering contracts, you issue a suspension. For other types of contracts, the issue is a stop work order. Should be in writing, include all the required information, so a description of the work to be stopped, instructions for the contractor about issuance of further orders, materials, or services, guidance in dealing with affected subcontracts, other suggestions for minimizing contract cost if you have to stop for whatever reason. What are some of the reasons for stop? Well, we talked about one earlier. We had DERS had a contract dispute. It means they weren't able to go forward with an existing contract, even though it was awarded, because somebody complained, and it turned into a year-long hassle before they could award the contract and move forward with the work. So reasons for suspension and stop order. Usually it's pending some decision by the government. And that decision might be due to some sort of delays, maybe some sort of approval or internal decision. The FAA is causing a delay, so we issue a suspension or stop work order until we get that taken care of. Weather-related delays, technological advancements, maybe there's a new technology on the horizon. So wait a minute, let's consider incorporating this new technology. So stop working for now while we evaluate the applicability of this new technology on this program. In construction, a lot of times it's unforeseeable conditions. If you're in an area that doesn't normally incur, let's say, rock, and you go into site preparation and find subsurface rock, that means for some heavy-duty demolition, possibly explosives, stuff that wasn't considered in the contract. You might stop work while we renegotiate the contract based upon these new conditions. If you do work in some place like Tennessee, every contract has a clause in there. This is how we're going to deal with rock, because as you know, if you've been there, Tennessee is built on one great big rock. But in other places in the country, that's not so pertinent. Sometimes it's just changes or government decisions are because of some kind of a realignment of programs and objectives within the FAA. Safety concerns sometimes, emergency situation sometimes arises. Or sometimes there's just a violation on the part of the contractor of some substantive contract terms that need to be, initiate a stop work or a suspension until that issue can be resolved. So at the contract awarded, the auditor might be called in by a given program to review a contractor's financial and accounting records, possibly even review a contractor's cost control system. The auditor will submit information and advice to the requesting activity or program office. I read a note that DCAA is a responsible government audit agency. That surprised me again because it's a DoD agency. Does anybody have experience with auditing agencies? I know CO should coordinate with AAP 500, the FAA headquarters cost price services, when they request an audit or audit services. But Bonnie or Jane, did you have to work through DCAA when you did or asked for an audit of the contractor? Okay, Durst is in a situation they can't close out because of an audit. Yes, Jane says. So you actually work with DCAA. Okay, I wasn't sure. I put a note in here because I wasn't sure it's correct. But you say the DCAA actually worked with you to do an audit, and in your opinion, they were awesome. Could you come on microphone and share your experience with DCAA just a little bit, how you initiated that involvement and how that went?
Yeah, they were, I enjoyed working with DCA because it took a lot off my plate when I was working with DoD.
Always a good thing.
Yeah, they helped you a lot of the times, you know, when especially I did specialize with some like research and development type programs like the SIBRs and STTRs. Okay. Especially too if you had to get a contractor to get an approved accounting system. They were very good at helping kind of navigate that for them and kind of get them in line so they actually have proof of accounting systems and to prove that they weren't just making stuff up in Excel and sending it over. And like their indirect rates too, things like they were very, very good with indirect rates, and you know, they keep their audits too and they're good for memory, I think it was like 5 years. 5 or 10 years, and then you know it helps you negotiate moving forward too. So when you go into negotiations with the contractor, you at least have their indirect rates established, which is a huge portion just knocked out of everything else you got to talk about.
Yeah. Well, okay, that makes sense, and I like the perspective. It takes a lot off of your plate when dealing with the contractor. Maria said that they are responsive. Now, Jane, you worked with DCAA when you were with the DoD, but I just want to confirm they are still the auditing agency that the FAA uses.
That I have no idea what we do here.
Okay, do you know, Maria? Are they the auditing agency that the FAA uses?
Yeah, as far as I know, sir, yes.
Okay. Okay, good. I'll take the question mark off my note here, and that's good to know. And it's also good to know that it's very comforting when you find out about an agency within the federal government that you actually feel comfortable working with, and they do a good job for you. It's encouraging. All right. We're done with the initiation of work and modifications, and I'm going to go on and talk. Let's see. I'm still well within time. I'm going to talk a little bit about design and production assurance. in the next section. And a big part of that is flagging or capturing counterfeit parts. Counterfeit parts, there's always an increased risk of compromised reliability of equipment. There was a congressional investigation that took place where they found in reviewing Department of Defense supply chain passenger seatbelts, guys, 1,800 instances of counterfeit electronic parts being used in the DoD. So what constitutes a counterfeit part? Well, there's a couple. Most of the time it's reusing a part, representing as new, something that has been previously used, but it's also a part with false origin, which both should be considered criminal. I think in some place they are criminal. Has anybody had any experience with counterfeit parts on an FAA contract, or flagging counterfeit parts on an FAA contract? About 1,000 years ago, when I was still in school, I worked with a vendor who was supplying parts to the Navy. And this really creeped me out at the time, but the Navy, of course, had a Buy American clause in their contract. And this vendor was procuring large ship-based valves from Taiwan, and then they'd use a ball-peen hammer to take the made in Taiwan off the casing of the valves and supply them to the shipyard that was in San Diego, California. Samaya, you're laughing. It was close to 1,000 years ago. So you hate to think that there's those kinds of practices. Of course, that was in the late 70s. And I think deceptive practices were a little bit more widespread back then. There's been a big turn towards transparency and ethics in government contracting in the U.S. The company I work for, Leidos, puts a terrific amount of emphasis on ethics and honesty, and it's very, very refreshing to see that from a contractor perspective. Let's see. So guidance on counterfeit parts covers procurement process, parts detection, and parts reporting. So the AP 120 is a procurement information and services team. They have a database that's available as an information sharing tool as part of a parts action plan to mitigate the impact of suspected counterfeit parts. Quality assurance program should help capture or identify counterfeit parts. There's QA objectives that relate to the national airspace, establish quality assurance program requirements so that we obtain systems and equipment and services that conform to our technical requirements. How do we know without a quality assurance program that our technical requirements are actually met? If we don't have a specific quality assurance program, FAA uses ANSI or ASQ Q9000 standards for acquisitions, aimed at eliminating the safety risk that's posed by non-conforming parts to the NAS system. So responsibilities for QA. The product or service team, of course, has primary coordination responsibility with acquisition quality assurance group, include QA provisions and procurement and QA evaluation criteria. The Office of Acquisition and Contracting is responsible for QA policy standards, procedures. They provide guidance, oversight, support. Quality Reliable Officer, sometimes named on a program, QRO. They provide on-site support at the contractor's facility and she or he is actually authorized to accept or reject contractor deliverables based on conformance to technical requirements. The CO makes sure that the QA provisions include the documentation of a valid quality assurance program for any contract going forward. And then there's the different regions, service areas, and centers. They make sure that they include a QA programs in their national airspace acquisition. So standards or requirements include criticality, complexity, dollar value. They change based upon criticality, complexity, dollar value. Critical application is one where the failure could cause injury or even jeopardize the ability for the agency to perform their mission. Complex items are those that have, let's call it sub-quality characteristics or subsystem or component quality characteristics that impact the performance of the overall system. Non-complex quality characteristics are those for which just some simple measure or test of the end item is sufficient to establish or to determine conformance to the quality requirements and contract requirements. There are 3 levels of contract quality requirements. Contractor inspection is the simplest level. It's used for small purchases. There's no government source inspection involved. The contractor is the sole responsible party to inspect and make sure conformance to quality requirements and quality standards. There's a standard inspection, and there's an standard inspection clause that's available in the AMS toolkit that should be used on FAA procurements when the item warrants a little bit greater than just a contractor inspection. It requires an inspection system to be put in place and documented that's acceptable to the government. Provide for government inspection at the source. And of course, any administrative details, how to handle, as an example, unacceptable items. And then there's a higher level contract requirement. It's used for systems or parts that is complex or critical. It requires a complete quality assurance system approach, not just final inspections. We want quality assurance at multiple steps, if not every step in the process. And again, the Office of Acquisition and Contracting tends to use ASQ or ANSI Q9000 series for standard acquisitions when a higher level quality requirement is identified. Let's talk about acceptance. So acceptance, when a government accepts or a government representative accepts some supply or service, it means it conforms to the applicable contract requirements. It's the responsibility, ultimately, of the CO, although they can pass that responsibility on to the COR. Contract should specify the place of acceptance, any sort of acceptance provisions. Might use some form of a certificate of conformance or source inspection report to show that compliance has been met. Warranties should provide some sort of path for correction of any kind of defect that might be found. There needs to be a defined time or use, number of use, sometimes operating hours or something like that before the occurrence occurs, and with the occurrence or some sort of specified event that gives the FAA opportunity to assert its contractual right to a warranty or warranty service. There's a government industry data exchange program. That's a cooperative program between government and industry. It's designed to eliminate some of time and money in development programs by exchanging existing knowledge, especially about quality, technical data that's required for quality assurance or research or development design, sometimes even production or operation. We can share that information between industry and government. We can not have to reinvent the wheel. We can benefit and learn from somebody else's experience. So the objective really is to improve safety, reliability, quality, and sometimes even logistics support for a program. Considerations for use clauses. Different AMS quality assurance clauses are available. Again, it's part of in the FAST toolkit. You can find pre-made clauses that you can drop into contracts. For construction non-conforming parts, reviewing construction design, specification, and drawing might be useful for identifying non-conforming parts early. The contractor's inspection system should detect non-conforming parts and ensure somehow that any non-conforming parts are separated from acceptable parts and disposed of according to contract requirements. So let's think about the SWIM. Pull out the extended scenario that we're using again for this class. What specific actions would you take to assure quality in the SWIM program? Think about what the deliverables are and are there any kind of quality methods or procedures that might be involved in the SWIM program? Okay, FAA templates for different artifacts. I imagine there's probably templates for things like meeting minutes or discussions or anything that's documented as part of the SWIM program. Key performance indicators related to accuracy of document maintenance. So auditing of documents to assure that there's accuracy in the maintenance and the reporting. Performance measures. Okay. Maria says requirements will become bigger. It must have a quality assurance plan. Okay, so if it is a big deal, we need to see from the vendor up front, what is their plan for assuring quality? You know, they're in charge of the heart and core and documentation of this program. How are they going to show us or assure us that they're going to do a good job of maintaining quality on the documentation? Configuration management becomes extremely important anytime you're dealing with documentation, especially something that gets updated. How are they going to manage the database? How are they going to train people? What are the requirements for training and safety? What's the quality assurance program to show that only qualified and trained people have access to the database or participate in the system or the SWIM program from the contractor side? Good. It's all very, very valid considerations. Okay. So even something as simple as the administrative support might be elevated to the need for a quality assurance program. Everybody benefits from a good quality assurance program. And not only FAA in terms of quality of deliverables, but it makes the contractor better by adhering to a quality assurance program. So speaking of quality assurance, we're about to have another quality break. It is 5 minutes to 3. I promise you a 10-minute break at the top of every hour. So we're going to split the top of the hour, and we'll see you back here at 5 minutes after 3 Eastern time. And this will be our last break for the day. And we'll see how far we get before we take a break for the rest of the day. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. I'm going to put you back into the lobby and see you then. And by the way, when you're in the lobby, if you need to turn the sound and music down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, there's a speaker icon the symbol that you can use to adjust the volume down. See you in 10 minutes. Okay, guys, welcome back. We're about to start in the next section, payment and accounting. I see Maria's ahead of us with a green thumbs up already. Actually, we're well ahead of the schedule at this point. And I'm considering this actually might be a good stopping point for the day and pick up again tomorrow at 9 o'clock. So I'll put it out to you guys. Let's open it up for any other discussion, but let me say this. Maybe we'll do a quick vote. Let's see. If you guys are okay wrapping up today and then picking up again at 9 o'clock tomorrow, why don't you give me a green thumbs up and we'll see what this looks like. It looks like we're all over the place on that one. Everybody wants it. Okay, that's good. It's actually a convenient place. I'd hate to get into the middle of a topic and have to end it. So we'll pick up on this. We've only got 4 topics to cover, and then we're going to do a review of the entire course. But the review takes the shape of a Jeopardy game, where the 4 groups 1, 2, 3, and 4 will compete against each other for points by answering Jeopardy questions. So that's great. Here's what I'm going to do. If you got something else to do or somewhere else to be, that's fine. Consider today done. I'll see you tomorrow morning, same bat time, same bat place at 9 o'clock. You'll be back on this URL. We'll pick up class then. If you have anything you want to talk about, I'll stick around right here and answer any questions or discuss any topics. And otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Have a nice evening, everybody. Thank you.